President Trump has to do and what Attorney General Barr especially has to do, and I think he's on that path, is focus in on finding out who did what, when, and what did they do, and was it illegal? If so, he's got to issue referrals to a grand jury to do indictments. And then we have to indict those people, put them in court, and let them tell us in open court why they did what they did, and hold them accountable. If they violated the law, they need to go to jail. I mean, that's what they do to whistleblowers all the time, or anybody that opposes their positions, like they were trying to do under the Nixon administration, using the FBI and the CIA and the NSA to spy on U.S. citizens who opposed Nixon's agenda. And so from my point of view, that the start is to go at that FISA court warrants that they got against somebody in the Trump campaign, and then trace that back as to who was involved in it, all the way through to the British, MI6, and so on, to see who actually did what part other intelligence agencies, foreign intelligence agency had in helping that effort, and then trace it all back to all the people in the United States government that were participating in that process. I looked at that as you had talked about earlier, Barbara, as a coup. It was a coup attempt. At a minimum, it was sedition, trying to subvert the entire process of the U.S. government, the agencies of the government, and fundamentally, it was treason against the founding principles of this nation. That's my view of it. So he's got to look back. He's got to hold these people accountable. They've got to go to jail. If they don't go to jail, this can always happen again.
The first thing he needs to do is identify all of the intelligence that was collected and disseminated within the U.S. government, within classified channels. Most of it was probably top secret. Some of it was likely special access program. And identify who originated that intelligence. Where did it come from? Did it originate with the British? Or did it originate with an NSA collection directive? Or did it come from a CIA directive? Then identify the individuals that were involved with working on those reports, putting them out, and who their chain of command and supervisors were. He needs to demand that the FBI identify all human assets and informants that were working on this, working on political campaigns, not just against Trump, but against other campaigns, and to ask for the declassification of all they're called FD 1023 reports, the reports where the FBI meets with the confidential human source and writes up what they talked about and what directions that they were given for future action. The same needs to be done with the Central Intelligence Agency to identify any individuals or contractors that were paid or enlisted in producing such information. So those are some immediate things, and then along with what Bill said, declassify the FISA warrant, declassify all 302s that were produced, and then as that information comes out, it's going to expose just how corrupt the FBI and the CIA were. Right now, I find it fascinating to listen to. It's mostly Democrats. There's one or two Republicans who talk about our wholly sanctified intelligence and law enforcement community, and how dare Donald Trump attack their integrity. That's like somebody complaining about someone who's attacking Catholic bishops and cardinals, and then you go out to find out they're a bunch of pedophiles. So that's sort of the equivalent of what we have here. They're trying to hide behind the blanket of claiming sanctity and top secret access, and they're only doing their job, when in fact they were corrupt and they've lied, and they need to be held accountable, as Bill said.
The finger-pointing amongst the deep state coup minions is taking on feverish proportions. Former FBI Director Jim Comey, former CIA Director John Brennan, and former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper are fumbling with a hot potato of treason not seen in the United States history since the likes of Benedict Arnold. According to sources familiar with the records pertaining to the internal deep state collusion to create an insurance policy to take down newly elected President Trump, indicate that then FBI Director James Comey, according to a late 2016 email chain, told Bureau subordinates that then CIA Director John Brennan insisted the Steele Hillary Clinton dossier be included in the intelligence community assessment on Russian interference.
I do believe it's important that there be an understanding about just how strongly predicated that investigation was. I was there in the summer of 16, and it was very well predicated to launch this counterintelligence investigation about what the Russians were doing to interfere in our election and who among American citizens might have been working with them.
There was no proper predicate. There were no facts to sustain a counterintelligence investigation. And the facts that did exist were made up by the U.S. intelligence community, fed to the FBI through foreign sources, and then used to obtain FISA warrants.
Another massive eye-opener just around the bend is the mounting evidence on former CIA director and self-proclaimed communist John Brennan's involvement with moving the Steele Clinton dossier through corrupt channels in Washington, D.C. to attain illegal FISA warrants.
First of all, Mr. Brennan is the primogenitor of this entire plot. All of this started with him insisting that there be an investigation by the FBI into Mr. Trump and his campaign, with no evidence whatsoever. Brennan enlisted the services of foreign intelligence services to assist in planting evidence that would find its way to the FBI and eventually into applications for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act electronic warrants. Mr. Brennan has become a bit of a nutcase. You can watch him on television. He is insistent. He's belligerent. He really acts like a very guilty man, protesting a bit too much.
Is this president letting our country down?
Well, I think the president has shown a lack of understanding of international affairs, as well as a real ignorance of what it takes to be president of the United States. As mean-spirited, he is dishonest, he has shown a lack of integrity, and he has continued to, I think, demean the office of the presidency.
This type of behavior and actions on the part of foreign tyrants and despots, I never, ever thought that I would see it here in the United States.
Does CIA spy? Yes. Do we spy against our foreign adversaries? Yes. Do we spy against domestic individuals? No, we do not.
They spied on the Trump campaign. They spied on Carter Page. They spied on Papadopoulos. They spied on Sam Clovis. They were spying all over the place, weaponizing the powerful tools of intelligence. By the way, didn't Brennan seem awfully defensive for someone who has done nothing wrong?
Is discovered in the last week, some very fine reporting by John Solomon of The Hill, that made a major memorandum concerning Christopher Steele had been hidden by the FBI from the Inspector General. That memorandum was written by a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, who said, after meeting with her staff with Christopher Steele, who came in to see them, that he was basically a liar, unreliable, that he had a bias against the president and his campaign, that he wanted to hurt the president, that he helped Hillary Clinton, and that he wanted to get this information out before the election. This woman, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, her name was Kavalek, wrote a memo to the FBI and sent it to them immediately within 24 hours. The FBI, we now know, received it and did nothing about it.
So even with all of the silencing of truth-seeking journalists and an ongoing violation of the premier law of the land, the Democrats still can't avoid the very serious investigation now in the very capable hands of John H. Durham, the United States Attorney in Connecticut, who as a special prosecutor has investigated alleged wrongdoing among national security officials, which included the FBI's ties to the Boston Mafia. And with this mounting nightmare for the Democrats, the pushback will be monumental. John Bound reporting.
What I am told by someone who is in a position to know is that this initiative to enlist the British and other foreign intelligence agencies and collection campaigns to produce intelligence that could be of benefit to the Clinton campaign started in the summer of 2015. The entire process, though, was designed to create a pretext. Because if you can point to something that's classified and claim that it shows some sort of relationship without exposing that in many of those reports, the relationships that were being described were in fact created by other intelligence operations. As an example, in the case of George Papadopoulos, the British used their own intelligence assets, one of whom is Joseph Massoud, to make an approach to George, to offer to get George information about the Russians and dirt that they had on the Clinton campaign. George Papadopoulos is in London at the time when he's getting this information. He communicates that via an email back to the United States. Well, that communication is intercepted both by the National Security Agency and by British intelligence. It's then produced in a report that Subject A in Britain communicated to Subject B on Candidate One's campaign about having dirt on Hillary Clinton. Well, that all of a sudden, that's intelligence. That's proof. So you can go to the FBI and say, we've got intelligence that shows that there's some smoke here and we've got to investigate it. And yet they don't admit that the entire thing was staged. But by staging that kind of thing, you can plant information that appears to be true, even though it's a lie. And so that's how this thing started. And then as the campaign progressed from the summer of 2015, getting into late winter 2015, early spring 2016, it became clear that Donald Trump was the front runner. And it was at that point that this covert action, because there's no other way to describe it, but it was a covert action that involved both British and American intelligence assets, as well as U.S. law enforcement assets in the FBI, to create the impression, to feed the meme that Donald Trump was acting with and at the behest of Vladimir Putin. That whole plot began to be unfolded in earnest in March and April of 2016.
You've pointed to in your writings a specific email on WikiLeaks between John Podesta from the Clinton campaign, the chairman of the Clinton campaign, way back in December of 2015. He's talking to a reporter from the Hill newspaper, and they're talking about the fact that way back in December of 2015, the most effective tactic against Donald Trump was going to be to smear him based on his buddy-buddy relationship with Putin.
The other element in this is that when you look at the law firm of Perkins Coie was the one who was involved with bringing CrowdStrike into the DNC to, quote, establish, to investigate the alleged Russian hacking of the DNC. I think the simple fact that they brought CrowdStrike in for that was part of a pretext to blame the Russians because they knew that it was not the Russians who actually did this. It was also Perkins Coie that hired Fusion GPS, who then in turn hired Christopher Steele. And yet what we've also learned is that throughout this process, there were FBI informants, confidential human sources, that were being targeted against the Trump campaign. Christopher Steele, for example, we know without a doubt that as of February 2016, and perhaps even earlier, but we know for certain that in February 2016, he was a fully signed up confidential human source for the FBI. And he was, as was later admitted, was the one who alerted his FBI handler to this nefarious activity by the Russians that he was picking up from his intelligence sources. We know that Felix Sater, who's actually in the news today, was an FBI confidential human source. He was the one that proposed to the Trump campaign that they go do something in Russia, build a Trump Tower in Moscow. He was the one that initiated that. It wasn't Donald Trump Jr., it wasn't Donald Trump, it wasn't Ivanka Trump. None of the Trumps that, they'd have not a single shred of evidence of them sitting around saying, you know what, we ought to do something in Moscow. Let's get a hold of Felix and ask him to help us. It was just the opposite. Finally, you had a character by the name of Henry Greenberg. He's actually got 10 different names. He was signed up 17 years ago by the FBI as a confidential human source. And he approaches first Michael Caputo, who then puts him in touch with Roger Stone and offers to sell dirt on Hillary Clinton. They declined the offer. So when you're seeing that kind of effort by the FBI, it totally explodes the lie that the FBI is telling, that they didn't start looking at this hard until Alexander Downer an Australian diplomat who has ties to MI6 as well, and was a key member in a firm comprised of former MI6 officers known as Haklut. Alexander Downer, who had a personal relationship with Bill Clinton, had signed a $25 million deal with him on behalf of the Australian government with the Clinton Foundation. Downer shows up 2 months after allegedly having this conversation with George Papadopoulos to suddenly report an alarming thing that he heard 2 months ago. I mean, it's so ludicrous, the fact that you've got educated adults believing this crap and repeating it just makes you want to scratch your head and recognize that, you know, this has nothing to do with reality. This is all a contrived fantasy.
What we have here, by both kind of points which you're making, the most significant one being the completely impartial point backed by forensic evidence that the Russian hack never happened. Again, coming back to the fundamental myth of Russiagate. You mentioned CrowdStrike, which is the firm which went in and did the so-called forensics on the DNC. Mind you, the FBI never took possession of the crime scene, something which is highly irregular in the annals of investigation, and they left it to this firm called CrowdStrike to come up with the analysis. And that analysis is actually what Robert Mueller uses in his report. In fact, you know, Bill, I wanted to get your comment. I reread some sections of other people's commentaries on the Mueller report, and one of the things they keep pointing out is that the way Mueller seems to have structured this, and CrowdStrike seems to have structured it with all of these intermediate servers and everything else in the United States at this point, that it would look like that the Russians were seeking to get caught. By the way their operation was allegedly structured. You were a Russian analyst at the NSA for a long time prior to becoming technical director. Do you think, based on what you know about the technical expertise of the Russians in this area, that they would have structured something in such a way as to get caught?
Absolutely not. I mean, they're professional espionage agents. I mean, they would not. Who would leave telltale signs of Russia in there, like Cyrillic and names of people and things like that? Who would do that? Certainly, no respectable Russian spy would, and no U.S. spy would either. The Chinese are also good at that, at keeping their identity away too. Like they'll use multiple avenues to do attacks on points of attack on different companies and so on. And they'll come in from multiple different directions, you know. So it's not a something that any respectable spy would do in any country.
Now, Dmitry Alperovitch, who's the principal in CrowdStrike, has quite a historical hatred of Russia, and he's tied to something called the Digital Research Lab at the Atlantic Council, which also works for Stratcom and NATO. And all of these people, beginning at the same time, I find it not uncoincidental, beginning at the same time that Larry talks about Hillary Clinton or someone in the Obama administration or somebody tasking both the intelligence agencies of the United States and Britain to spy, which is the word to use, on every single presidential campaign other than Hillary Clinton's. At the same time that this is going on in 2015, there's a major effort going on from NATO and from Stratcom and from these other places to counter what they call Russia propaganda or Russian propaganda. And I don't find it terribly coincidental. If you look at Christopher Steele's career, he in fact, just prior to being hired by Fusion GPS, had written an entire study called Operation Charlemagne for British intelligence, in essence, and for NATO, saying that the Russians had intervened and caused Brexit. So when we analyzed this initially and looked at it, we said this is not just limited to the United States. It's an international operation, and it's pursuant to something you might call the idea that we should have a new Cold War or a containment of both Russia and China at this point. And we viewed it, and I still view it as kind of an interesting and forceful analysis to be looked at, as we have called here that everything from British intelligence into the United States concerning the Trump campaign and concerning all of these things should be declassified as one of the first steps of any investigation. What were they saying, and why, most importantly, which people need to understand, was this happening? Why was Trump such a big deal, and why was such an effort undertaken clearly to ensure that Hillary Clinton, as opposed to anybody else, was the next U.S. president?
June 9, 2016. Don Jr. meets with a Russian lawyer named Natalia Veselnitskaya under the guise that she has dirt on Clinton. But this was a bait and switch, and she was actually an anti-Trump plant who was a Fusion GPS associate who met with its founder Glenn Simpson before and after the Trump Tower meeting. This meeting was later used to try to tie Trump to Russia. But what the media failed to report is that this lawyer had an expired visa at this time and was granted a very rare special immigration parole by Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General on Hillary Clinton's email investigation, meaning that Obama's DOJ let this Russian lawyer enter the United States to meet with Don Jr. even though she had no visa. Now, this was likely done so that they could later point to this meeting as Russian collusion, which is what they did. On June 12, 2016, in a TV interview, Julian Assange stated, "We have upcoming leaks in relation to Hillary Clinton, which are great." Now the DNC knew that major damage control would be required to soften the blow of the leaks coming out. On June 14th, the DNC released a statement saying that they had just discovered that their servers were hacked. They also cited that the hacker gained access to their Trump opposition research. The same day, a private contractor of the DNC called CrowdStrike produced a report suggesting that the Russians infiltrated the server, also mentioning Trump opposition research. I should also mention that the president of CrowdStrike is Sean Henry, a former FBI agent who used to be the executive assistant director to Robert Mueller, so that's probably a conflict of interest. June 15th, the Romanian man calling himself Guccifer 2.0 takes responsibility for the hack, claiming to be WikiLeaks' source. As supposed proof, he produced the Trump opposition research that CrowdStrike mentioned just the day before. But Guccifer 2.0 chose to use a Russian VPN server to cloak his real IP address. Ultimately, he has never produced anything that actually proves that he hacked the DNC beyond the fact that he acquired this document. Nonetheless, the media ran wild with this story.
Russian military intelligence, or the GRU, compromised the email accounts of Democratic Party officials and publicly released victim data using the Guccifer 2.0 persona and DCleaks.com and in exclusives to media outlets. They also relayed material to WikiLeaks.
And they also they used Guccifer 2 as a basis for that. And we can prove that Guccifer 2 is a fraud and a fabrication. Most of the timestamping we found internally in the data that was being used by or posted by Guccifer 2 shows that it's originating somewhere in the United States on the East Coast Central Time and one case on the West Coast. So, you know, that's a total fabrication, and he's basing that in DC leaks on that in that indictment as the fundamental evidence they're using. That's crazy.
How sloppy. And before we began this phone call, you mentioned something about a lawyer who did a FOIA request. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, Ty Clevenger, he FOIA'd information from NSA asking for any data that involved both Seth Rich and also Julian Assange. And they responded by saying, we've got 15 files, 32 pages, but they're all classified in accordance with the Executive Order 13526, governing classification, and therefore you can't have them. But that says that NSA has records of communications between Seth Rich and Julian Assange.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange said that multiple parties had access to DNC emails and that there was no proof that Russia was behind the attack.
3 cybersecurity experts told us that the DNC emails were hacked by Russian intelligence. What do you say?
Well, there's no proof of that whatsoever. We have not disclosed our source. And of course, this is a diversion that's being pushed by the Hillary Clinton campaign.
On July 10, 2016, DNC data director Seth Rich was murdered. The police claim that the murder was a botched robbery, even though nothing on him was stolen. And a few hours earlier, a couple blocks away, a locked gun box from an FBI van was stolen. December 14th, WikiLeaks associate and former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, confirms that he was in Washington in September to get emails from an insider with the Democratic Party who was disgusted at the corruption of the Clinton Foundation and the tilting of the primary election playing field against Bernie Sanders. He also said that neither of the leaks came from Russia. The source had legal access to the information. The documents came from inside leaks, not hacks. December 29th, Obama imposes sanctions on Russia and expels 35 diplomats based on the claims from CrowdStrike about Russian hacking of the DNC. And at this point, the FBI has still not examined the DNC servers to verify CrowdStrike's findings, despite James Comey saying that there were multiple requests at different levels to look at the servers. May 20th, Kim.com tweets to Sean Hannity, "I knew Seth Rich. I knew he was a WikiLeaks source. I was involved." May 30th, Kim.com sends a statement to Robert Mueller claiming that he has evidence relevant to the Russian probe, but never hears back. August 1st, a recording of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh is leaked, and he claims that Seth Rich was a WikiLeaks source.
He makes contact with WikiLeaks. That's in his computer. But anyway, they found what he had done. He had submitted a series of documents, of emails, some juicy emails from the DNC. But WikiLeaks got access, and before he was killed.
Cognitive dissonance is a major issue amongst the left. It can be very stressful dealing with facts you refuse to accept. If you have a family member suffering from this degenerative mental condition, buy them a bottle of Ultimate Fish Oil from InfoWarsStore.com. Studies have suggested that fish oils and fish oil supplementation can slightly lower blood pressure, decrease triglyceride levels, decrease the growth rate of plaque, and provide a soothing reduction in inflammatory responses in joints and the digestive system. Recent studies have suggested that high EPA and DHA fish oil can stimulate immune function by increasing the concentration and activity of immune cells. Perhaps that family member or friend's mind is shorting out with leftist fantasies due to a lack of the supplementation found in Ultimate Fish Oil. It worked for my family, and now I can have a logical and calm discussion about actual facts that pertain to reality. Get your Ultimate Fish Oil for a friend, family member, or yourself at InfoWarsStore.com.